I'm truly appreciative of the three presentations that preceded me because they set the stage for what I'm about to share with you now in giving you a framework for ancient Egyptian history, Nubian and Kushite history. And I'd like to expand on that framework by bringing you my own personal interpretation of Nile Valley history and culture. I'm kind of ashamed to say it, but I think it needs to be said. It wasn't until 1977, 3 years after I graduated from college, that I learned the ancient Egyptians were black. I went to a presentation at Georgetown Law School given by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, who had just published the book, They Came Before Columbus, The African Presence in America, which he documented the fact that Africans from the Nile Valley built ships, navigated the Nile River, Mediterranean Sea, and the Atlantic Ocean, and had interactions with indigenous people here in the Americas 2,500 years before Columbus was born. And that these ancient Africans were from Egypt and the Egyptians were black. That was the first time in my life anyone had ever told me that the Egyptians were black. It challenged everything that I'd read in every book, every class I had taken in elementary school, high school, and college, even though I attended predominantly black schools all of my life. So Dr. Van Sertima was responsible for introducing me to what I refer to as forbidden knowledge. And as a result, I became aware of the writings of Dr. John Henry Clark, Yosef Ben-Jochannan, Sheikh Hamdi Diop, Teofilo Mabenga, scholars, African scholars, who were clear about the history and lineage of African people. So this project that I'm involved in is dedicated to my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Asa Hilliard, who was an educational psychologist. He was a historian, and he died 7 days after giving an opening keynote at the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations Conference in Aswan, Egypt, on August the 7th, 2007. He died a week later at Anwar Sadat Hospital in Cairo, Egypt. His death came as a surprise to everyone who knew him and loved him. And because of my close association with him, when the opportunity was presented to me, I named this project in his memory because for those who understand the essence of African history and culture, honoring your ancestors is the most noteworthy thing that any person can do. And one of the ways that you honor your ancestors is to name buildings, streets, organizations, and institutions after them. So I'd like to share with you the work that we have been doing for the past decade in honor of my good friend Asa Hilliard via the Asa Restoration Project. As I briefly spoke of Dr. Hilliard, who was an educational psychologist who was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time of his death. And one of the things that I learned from Dr. Hilliard was chronology, putting history within a chronological context. And Dr. Hilliard, even though it may be a little difficult for you to see at the bottom of the slide, gave us a timeline of the history of ancient Kemet. Kemet is the original name for the country that the Greeks called Egypt. Most of the names that we use to identify African people, places, and things have been changed by non-African people. Egypt is a Greek word, Sphinx is a Greek word, pyramid is a Greek word. And so if we're truly to understand the history and culture and traditions of African people, we must learn to see their history and culture and the personalities through the lenses of and the names of those people. So the original name of the country of Egypt is Kemet. Kemet is a word which references the land of the black people and not the black soil, as some would have us believe. And that there is a fundamental difference between Kemet and Egypt. Dr. Hilliard also divided the history of Kemet into 4 golden ages. The first golden age was dynasties 3 through 6, when all the great pyramids were built. Second golden age was dynasties 11 and 12, when all of the great literature of Kemet was written. The third golden age was dynasties 18 and 19, when many of the temples and monuments which millions of tourists come to Egypt today to visit were built during this time frame. And the fourth and final golden age, a period which Dr. John Henry Clark refers to as Africa's last great walk in the sun, was the 25th dynasty. The 25th dynasty is the only dynasty of the 30 dynasties of Egyptian history that traditional Egyptologists will refer to as a Negro dynasty, which implies that all the other dynasties were non-black. That is a lie that must be challenged, must be refuted with evidence. with evidence, and the evidence exists. Here is a pictorial reference which shows you the difference between Kemet and Egypt. All of these are images of Kemetic kings, African kings who ruled Egypt. These are images that were created during their lifetime. And you can see based on the physical evidence that these people don't look too differently than I do. Egypt was conquered by Alexander Macedonian in 332, or Kemet was conquered by Alexander Macedonian in 332, and that is when Kemet ceased to exist and it became Egypt. And looking at the images of the Greek and Roman conquerors, you can now see a physical difference between Egypt and Kemet. So we have to use chronology and imagery to help us restore and rescue our historical memory. So it's in that context I want to talk about the 25th dynasty, the area in which we have been excavating for the past decade, actually the past 12 years, is an area known as South Asasif. The Asasif mountain range separates the Valley of the Kings and Valley of the Queens, Hatshepsut's temple, divides it into a northern and southern region, and we're located in an area that we refer to as the Valley of the Ancestors. South Asasif is the residence of the first Kushite tombs ever built in ancient Kemet during the 25th dynasty. As Dr. Ashby mentioned, at the time of the 25th dynasty coming into power, ancient Kemet had fallen on hard times. The 25th dynasty was responsible for restoring the land of their ancestors. Their goal was to restore Ma'at to the land of their ancestors. And after Shabaka drove out the foreigners again after his brother Pianki died, Shabaka settled in Mennefer or Memphis, and then dispatched his architects and engineers and scholars to do a survey of all of the structures in Kemet so that they could be restored. Two of the men responsible for restoring structures in what was known then as Waset, which is now called Luxor and Karnak, were the occupants of the two tombs that we are excavating and restoring. Originally, the tombs lie underneath this village of El Perna on the west bank of Luxor. This work was initially undertaken by my colleague, Dr. Lena Pishtakova, who was a Russian-born, American-trained Egyptologist. She is one of the foremost experts on the art and history of the 25th dynasty. She discovered the lost tombs of South Asasif in 2006 and was unable to secure funding to continue this work. I met her 2 years into the project. She had run out of money. A colleague introduced us, and Alina gave me a tour of the work that she had done up to that time. I was impressed with the work that she had done. I knew that what she had discovered was too important to allow to fall by the wayside due to a lack of funds, and I made a commitment to raise the funds so that this work could continue, and starting working with her physically in 2009. So what I would like to share with you is what investment in the Asa Restoration Project, primarily through the funding of the African American community, has produced over the past decade. We are the first people of African ancestry to fund and fully participate in an archaeological excavation. When Alina first started in 2006, all she found was a hole in the ground. She began digging at a site which had 20 years earlier been referred to as the Tomb of Karakomen, which was almost totally and irreparably destroyed. The tomb had been used as a quarry by the residents of the village, and there was a flash flood in the 1990s, which caused the pillars supporting the ceiling of the tomb to collapse. The entire tomb was swallowed into the sand, and the residents of the village used that hole in the sand as a garbage dump. So when she began excavating at the site in 2006, as they dug deeper into the earth, they began to find remnants of the truncated pillars which supported the ceiling of the tomb. When I met her, she had only excavated up to the first two pillars. So let me show you briefly the work that's been done over the past 12 years. This is the area that was excavated between 2006, 2010. 2010 and 11, we started excavating in the second pillared hall. 2011 and 12, we excavated the open air sun court. And 2013, we excavated the original staircase leading to the sun court and the first and second pillared hall. So for the first time in probably over 1,000 years, we were now able to enter this tomb through the original entrance. And what I'll share with you is a brief history of the occupant of this tomb. His name is Karakamen. He was the fourth priest of Amen. We know that he worked at Karnak Temple, at Pedasut, and we believe that he was a person responsible for leading the morning prayers and libations down the central axis of this tomb, where he literally spoke the words to evoke the presence of Amen, the unseen presence of God Almighty, so that his spirit could literally inspire the 83,000 men and women who worked at this temple complex. Pedasut Karnak Temple is the largest temple in the world. We also have been able to identify his brother. This statue of his brother can now be found in the Nubia Museum in Aswan. His brother's name is Haramaket. We also know that he was the chief priest at Karnak Temple. We also have identified in excavating the tomb another brother of Karakamen by the name of Nesamenepet. So we have been able to identify at least 3 Kushite noblemen who were priests at Karnak Temple. To give you a sense of perspective, his tomb was comprised of 2 pillared hall. The first pillared hall was comprised of 8 pillars, and inscribed on the walls are texts from the Book of the Hours. In the second pillared hall, we have texts from pyramid texts as well as texts from the Book of the Dead. To give you a sense of perspective, Karakamen's tomb is 4 times larger than King Tut's tomb. And even though the contents of his tomb were destroyed, what remains is a archaeological and literary treasure trove. We have more texts from the Book of the Dead, the Book of the Hours, and pyramid texts in his tomb than any other tomb on the west bank of Luxor. We know that his tomb was built approximately maybe maybe around 715 BC. We began in 2011 to rebuild the pillars in the first pillared hall. There are 8 pillars. This is the first pillar that we reconstructed, where we actually took the fragments that we found during excavation. We used limestone, rebuilt the core of the pillars, and then cut out sockets to insert the fragments within the pillar. We have found to date over 36,000 fragments, which we are now using to reconstruct the tomb of Karakamen. 2010, we excavated the vestibule which connected the first pillared hall to the second pillared hall. And this is a portion of the restoration work that was done 3 years later. And this restoration was completed 2 years ago. So we're now in the restoration phase of the ASA restoration project. Here is a photograph taken in 2010 of the partially excavated first pillared hall and the second pillared hall. Here is a slide of the excavated second pillared hall. And then this photograph was taken in 2012 when we rebuilt the western wall within the second pillared hall, which has within it a false door with a smaller than life-size image of Asar, which stands in the central axis of the tomb. So the focal point of this tomb was directed toward Asar, and there are, or Osiris, his Greek name, and there are offering scenes around this false door where the priests are bringing offerings to Asar so that he may receive the spirit of Karakamen in his sacred space. And this is what the site looks like today, completely restored. Here is a photograph of the open-air sun court. This photograph was taken about 2014. Here's a bird's eye view of the western wall of the sun court, which leads to the entrance into the tomb, and there was, we believe that there was a door here that separated the sun court from the tomb. This photograph was taken last year, and this photograph was taken in August. Here's an aerial shot of Karakamin's tomb and the tomb of Karabashkin. Karabashkin's tomb was the first Kushite tomb built on the west bank of Luxor. Karabashkin was the mayor of Waset. We believe he was an architect. He also was a priest of Amun. We know, based on documents that we've been able to recover, that he was responsible for restoring Luxor Temple and Karnak Temple and the 1.7-mile Avenue of the Sphinxes, which connects these two temples. He also was responsible, along with Karakamin, for restoring the festivals which maintain the spiritual connection between these two temples and other structures on the west bank of Luxor. Here's a photograph that was taken in 2006 of the first pillared hall in Karabashkin's tomb. And 2 years ago, in 2016, we began excavating in the room which we believe would lead to his burial chamber. During the period of excavation, we were told by the residents of this village that everything had already been stolen, everything had already been robbed. And there was a rumor circulating over the years that we were working that they had stolen all of the contents of his burial chamber. They took everything except the sarcophagus, which was too big to take out. So we had no idea as to whether or not that statement was true. In 2016, we excavated in his burial chamber, and what we found was a ramp leading down to a red granite sarcophagus that weighs 20,000 pounds. 12 feet high, 8 feet high, 5 feet wide, 12 feet long. The red granite was quarried from Aswan, over 120 miles to the south. We don't know how they brought it there. We don't know how they carved it. We don't know how they got it into the burial chamber, but in 2016 we were able to show the world Karabashkin's sarcophagus. Again, here's a photograph taken in 2006 of the unexcavated first pillared hall. This photograph was taken in August. And in the process of excavating in the pillared hall, this past May, we found a side room. We excavated that side room, and we found in that room a shaft. We excavated the shaft and found that it led to 2 burial chambers. And in one of the burial chambers, we found, buried in the floor, a set of canopic jars. Canopic jars belonged to a woman identified as Amenertis, the lady of the house. And in August of this past year, we cleaned the canopic jars. We were invited by the director of the Luxor Museum to install them in the Luxor Museum. Here's a photograph of my daughter, who's sitting back in the back. She isn't left yet. And we packed them up. We transported them across to the East Bank. And on the 19th of August, we installed the canopic jars on the 2nd floor of the Luxor Museum, the first of many artifacts from the excavations of Karakamin and Karabashkin. We have already been asked to supply other items for the new, soon-to-be open Grand Museum of Egypt, which will be situated in Giza Plateau. And we have a lot of work to do. We're currently on tap to complete the excavation within 5 years. We plan to build a visitor center and a resource center so that we can continue our work. And in closing, as we finished the excavations of the tombs and had the homes in the vicinity of the tombs demolished, we discovered 27 additional Kushite tombs. So we have found the first Kushite necropolis in Egypt, and I will probably spend the rest of my life excavating there. Thank you very much.